All right, what up, team? Today I bring you my build diary for my Boneshatter Berserker. But before we get into it, let's answer the question, the thought that is obviously on everyone's mind. Wow, how does that MTX look so fucking good? God damn, we are dripping literally. Can it look any better? Answer yes. Blood Rage, but oh my god, it's the best shit you've ever seen. Where do you see this shit in the map? While said mapping showcase is going on, I'll talk a little bit about the build and how good I think it actually is. I do think Boneshatter Berserker is absolutely insane. It gets online extremely early, well before the axe. You feel it super early, and honestly, Berserker as an ascendancy is just nuts. It's really versatile in terms of you want more damage, you want more survivability, that sort of thing. I do think Gore Dancer, the 30% instant leech, is absolutely crack. I think Ancestral Fury, while it is a little bit clunky, is still really fucking good. This is an early version. I know there's a Progenesis on it, but everything else on this character is kind of a meme. Well, particularly the weapon. It's not really done up or optimized anyway. This was really just kind of like a proof of concept, but I do think this build is absolutely insane, and I will be doing an updated diary from this point forward. I just wanted to get something out for the time being. To go a bit more in depth with the build, let's talk about kind of the mainstay of it, or kind of the key functionality behind why I went Boneshatter and why I went Berserker. So Berserker in 3.26, they got a passive for their Ascendancy, which is Ancestral Fury, and its strike skills also target the previous location they were used. Now, theoretically, this would just be double damage on Boneshatter, and it would feel really good. However, there's a little bit of subtext here that is missing, which is that in order to get the Echo, the Ancestral Echo, you have to move a small amount. So, for example, if I am in my hideout and I just spam Boneshatter, the character doesn't actually get the Echo. You don't see the Echo at all. Whereas if I move a little bit, you now see the Echo. So you have to do these very slight stutter steps in between your Boneshatters to actually get the Ancestor to proc. Now, unfortunately, this does create a few complications with the build that we wouldn't normally have with Boneshatter otherwise. First and foremost, you have to do a stutter step every single time you want to get the Ancestral Echo to proc. Now, I will say this sounds a lot worse than it actually is in practice. Realistically, it's really not that bad at all. And one of the things I kind of like about it is that it keeps you a little more on your toes and a little more active when you're in the fight, as opposed to just droning out and holding down fucking Boneshatter. The other thing that this functionality does is it means that we have to use Boneshatter of Complex Trauma. The reason why we can't use OG Boneshatter is because it means you'd have to stutter step between every single auto. The problem is that you need to build Boneshatter stacks for OG Boneshatter to actually deal damage. This would severely fuck, even if you were getting an Echo on it, your Boneshatter stacking damage because of the fact that you can't build Trauma. How we get around this is by using Complex Trauma with Multi-Strike. This combination allows us to only have to stutter step in between every 3 autos as opposed to in between every single one. This is far more effective for actually DPSing and far more effective in terms of how it feels and how smooth it is to play, rather than, crackhead Adderall fucking stutter stepping in between every single auto. The other problem with it too is that you actually have to stutter step a significant distance. So if you're doing it between every attack, it is severely fucking your DPS, and it's really not worth it on something like OG Boneshatter. Another thing I'll mention here too is that this is really nice because it ensures that we actually get the value out of fucking multi-strike. A lot of people will put this into their POBs and into their 6 links because it is a damage increase, but it's really kind of like a POB warrior thing in a lot of cases, because most people don't actually get the full fucking damage out of it. Multi-strike isn't actually worth it unless you are hitting the second repeat. So unless you're hitting to the 3rd attack, this is a shit ass link and it's really fucking useless. However, if it is the case that we have to go every 3 and you get used to stutter stepping every 3 because of running Ancestral Fury, it actually gives us a ton of value. It's really useful to have, and in my opinion, it's required to make this work. I suppose you could technically do this with original Boneshatter if you had a metric ass ton of attack speed, but I still think it would feel like absolute dog shit. Okay, so here's the POB for the build, and I will have this linked in the description below. And I know I said kind of like a meme that it has a bunch of shit on it that sucks, it's not very good. I really was only referring to the weapon. It has a bunch of crazy stuff, I'm not gonna lie. Like, this body armor is cracked the fuck out. It has a strangle grasp with all these anointments. This is literally like at least 30 divine or some shit like that. Of course, we have a Progenesis, a bunch of random stuff, but this is the POB as it sits. Like I said, this is unoptimized, and I don't have Progenesis checked. I don't have my Molten Shell or Berserk on either, and I set it to about 5 trauma stacks. This is pretty ethical. I don't think there's anything here that's way out of the ordinary or anything like that. Overall, I think that as a proof of concept or just kind of starting it off, I think this build is extremely strong, and it gets very strong early, just because if we look at this damage number right here, again, this isn't technically true. It's probably more like 90% more damage. It's not quite, a 2x modifier. It might be like a 1.9 modifier or something like that. But the real DPS of this is going to be something along the lines of, we'll say 10 million, something like that. Because you have to stutter step step in between autos, there is a little bit of a DPS loss there. I don't think it's 10%. I don't actually know what it would be, but just to kind of, hedge our bets, we'll say it's like 10 million or something. We'll say it's 10% DPS loss for the stutter step in between attacks. Before I jump into Gore Dancer and a lot of the cool parts about this build, one thing I want to talk about was the links. So one of the things I like to run in my links is Awakened Ancestral Call. I prefer this over taking this dog shit strike cluster to get the mastery and over taking the strike implicit on gloves. The reason why I do not like the strike implicit on gloves is simply because it just doesn't have range, and you get at most 2 targets if you want to sell your soul and use dog shit conflict orbs and blow 40 div for no reason. I prefer the much cheaper, simpler, and better solution in my opinion, which is Awakened Ancestral Call. What is really nice about this is that if you are going to go do a boss or you are going to do Ubers, you can just swap this out for something that does way more damage. Also, I do take Fortify. I do plan to remove this. I think this is kind of a waste. This is more of like a patchwork solution until you get the Eater of Ass implicit on the chest piece, which replaces the Fizz's Fire. I don't really think at this point I need this anymore. It's just kind of nice to have early, especially because Boneshatter fucks your ass up. I won't go over all this right now because there is still a ton of optimization yet that I still have left to do, especially with things like Strangle Grasp, my jewels, even my axe. I do plan to switch over to a Eventuality Rod and swap to crit, but that will be coming a little bit later once I stop fucking around with troll shit like haste. Lol. Some of the last things I want to talk about were mainly the leech component and the regen component of this build as it sits. So I've been running Gore Dancer. I do really like Gore Dancer, and I really like this build just for the simple fact that you get so much leech, you get so much life back from all of your leech sources that it actually feels extremely good and extremely tanky for this reason. This is often one of the most overlooked parts of the tankiness of a build. A lot of people think of mitigation, avoidance, and total pull, but a huge layer of tankiness is your recovery. And one of the things I really like about this build is our recovery gets absolutely insane. So not only do I have 2200 leech per second from Gore Dancer and this leech wheel over here, I'm also running a couple experimental things. So I am taking leech mastery, which is just 25% of damage taken recouped as life perpetually, because the conditional is that if life leech was removed by filling unreserved life recently, which of course we do. And I am also doing Harbies, which deal an ass ton of damage. And because a lot of the tankiness of this build is actually recovering damage, you get quite a bit of value out of leech mastery, on top of the fact that you also are taking damage from hitting yourself with Boneshatter. The other ultra experimental thing that I'm doing is that I'm running this enchant on one of my flasks. 15% of damage taken from hits is leeched as life during effect. So I don't even know if this works with Gore Dancer or instant leech, but the thought is that of this 15% of damage that we take, 30% of it is instantaneously leeched to us. It doesn't actually affect our leech per second because we deal so much damage, we're already at cap leech. However, what does go over cap leech is things like instant leech. So I get extra leech per second if I have more instant leech. This is also based on your attacks per second. We can model this in a few different ways. I don't know if this actually works the way that I think it does, and I also don't know that even if it did, it's even remotely worthwhile. It seems like it might be, but who knows? Maybe this is troll as fuck. But again, we do take a lot of damage. Our whole point is to recover damage, so theoretically I think this would be good. The other layer that I'm running, which I think is borderline required for Boneshatter, maybe not required, but is extremely and expressly desired, is the Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh combination of Untiring from the Juggernaut passive. You get so much health per second from running these 2 jewels. Again, it's not required, but it makes Boneshatter feel so much better to use. The amount of life regen you get is crazy, and I'll show that to you now. So if we look at this footage, it captures a lot of kind of what I'm getting at with these recovery layers. I've never seen the value of my life regen so high from Untiring. Usually I would say it's around like 2k to 2500. Here it gets up to like 5.5, which is insane. So that's 5.5k health regen on top of the 2200 per second from my actual leech itself. And if you look at the health globe here, we are taking, of course Progenesis is the only thing keeping me alive, but we are taking a ton of damage here, and we are regenning so much, like at least 8k per second. And look how slowly it goes up. So I think this stands to reason that we are taking a metric fucking ass ton of damage. And so I assume that life recoup node, as well as, again, assuming the damage taken, the 15%, 30% is instant leached on the flask, assuming that those are functioning, those are probably giving us a ton of life regen as well. So I would assume we're probably at least in like the 10Ks here in terms of, how much health we're getting back per second. But yeah, this is what I'm getting at with the recovery layers, and that's why I think the Untiring jewels are just absolutely nuts. But anyways, that's all I really have for you guys for this video. Like I said, I will be doing another video that is the updated, fleshed out, optimized version of this build. I wanted to show off kind of this POB. This is a potential POB for what I think the build can do in terms of damage and max hit and that sort of thing. And I would say this is probably like the mid-range of optimized. I think you can probably get a ton more damage and there's a lot more you can do with it. I try not to go too crazy, you know, level 95. I don't think this rod is anything crazy. I think it's like 75 div or something like that. Of course, there is a strangle grasp and fucking mage blood and proj, so you know, take all that with a grain of salt. But anyways, that is all she wrote. I will see you guys in the next one. Deuces.